thank everyone joining us today, whether you are watching or listening. I want to welcome you to this episode of Author Talk. My name is Aaron, and I want to officially welcome today's guests, Taylor Johnson and Dr. Joanne DiFrancisco-Donoghue. Now, Taylor has built a career in sports performance from the Division I level. He went on to work with the San Francisco 49ers and eventually made that transition to esports. Now I know he's coached some of the world's best gamers and has helped lead teams in developing software and research studies in cognition for athletes, I should say, at AIM Labs. He also created one of the world's largest esports training platforms in the world. Dr. Donoghue has also dedicated her career to studying exercise physiology and nutrition, and also made that transition to esports, where she's emerged as one of the leaders in research in the field of esports medicine. She is currently the director of clinical research and a professor at the New York Institute of Technology College of Osteopathic Medicine. Wanted to make sure I got that right there. So they use their expertise and join forces to produce their new book, Conditioning for Esports, a guide to training and performance. And they are here to tell us all about it today. So thank you very much. I definitely appreciate you joining me today, and thanks for your time.
Thanks for having us, Aaron.
So I gave somewhat of a brief intro compared to what it probably could have been for each of you. But I'm really curious on the progression of both of your careers and how you kind of landed in esports, which I would say maybe outside of pickleball right now is probably one of the fastest growing sports. So if you could kind of tell listeners what interested you most first in the field of kinesiology, and then kind of making that transition to where you guys are today.
Go ahead, Joanne.
Well, obviously, I'm an exercise physiologist by education and nutrition. So my whole career has really been based on doing research with neurological disorders, athletes. And to be honest with you, I mostly studied sports, and I did not really know about esports until about 2018. I'm sure it was much earlier for Taylor. When I first heard about it, I had no idea what it was. And I kind of looked into it and realized that this is one of the fastest growing fields. And like many people, I rolled my eyes a little bit thinking, well, I study sports and athletes. This is video game playing, not really my area of expertise. But when you look into it, these are competitors, and they are athletes that suffer from chronic injuries. So I really started dedicating my career to just kind of researching what it was all about. And to be honest with you, I was back in 2018, and there were only about 63 collegiate teams. I work mostly with collegiate esport players. And in 2018, it was 63 teams, and now there's over 240 nationwide. And on a high school level, it's even more. And then to answer your question, how I met through Taylor, Taylor is actually one of the first people to have a conference with this, and I was asked to speak at it, and we connected there.
Okay. Very good. How about you, Taylor? How did you, I obviously mentioned that you worked in sports performance, in college athletics and in the NFL, but kind of give us that background and then how you were able to transition to esports.
Yeah, thank you. My background's in athletic performance, coached in college and the NFL for about 10 years. And, I remember my first exercise physiology class and walking away from that being like, this is what I want to do, right? Just understanding the system of systems and how the body works and how you can really help somebody perform at the highest level. And so that track took me through college and the NFL. And I remember being I was there for 2 seasons with the 49ers and thinking like, this can't be the end all be all. Like I know for a lot, that's the pinnacle of sport, and that's the upper end, and there's one of 32 teams. And I was like, there has to be something else out there. And I started looking for other opportunities to really transfer the skill set of what's been done in traditional sport at the highest level. I'm like, where else could that fit? Right? And it's not to say that it's a square peg in a round hole. It's trying to say like what concepts or first principles could apply in other domains. And similar to Joanne, like I had known of esports, but didn't realize how big it had gotten when I started to reach out and look. And a good friend of mine was like, hey, you should check out esports. And I started to ask the questions I would of any other team, just taking a step back, removing the sport itself, and just saying, okay, as a team, competitive team, how do they practice? How do they train? How do they recover? What's the organization look like? And realized very quickly there was a lot more similarities and differences. And I was like, all right, well, there's not a lot of people in the space that are doing it. I'm gonna go for it. So that's how I got into that space, and it ended up being about 7, 8 years of me spending time in that space. And I met some amazing people like Joanne and some amazing other people along the way. A lot of the contributing authors of the book, we're all part of that journey. And the book is a product of all of our knowledge and expertise coming together to really give a foundation of like what's possible, because I do think there's so much more to be explored in that space, which is what makes it really exciting.
Very good. So I grew up probably like most kids. I think a typical summer day for me would be, waking up, watching Sports Center, playing PlayStation, maybe doing some chores around the house, going outside to play catch, play more video games, and then eventually, go to my own practice or game if I had one that day. I think at the time, my parents probably thought that I was wasting my time, playing video games as much as I was. And probably didn't think that there was much of a future in that. Looking back at it now, as we've kind of seen it grow and evolve into what it is today, I guess from your guys' perspective, being in the middle of all this, have you been surprised at how it has evolved and really kind of joined the world of high performance sports?
Again, I work on a collegiate level, and I'm blown away at how fast it's grown. There's so many areas of it. First, working with a collegiate esport team, it's the same as some, if people are watching this, it is the same as being part of any other sports team. There's camaraderie. It brings pride to your school. But on the other note, when it's on a college campus and you have this gaming room, it's almost like you have an intramural sport as well with it. And I've seen so many different departments on a college campus, professors also included, medical students, undergraduate students, all come together and play video games. I mean, it's very rare someone knows. I don't know anybody who doesn't play some form of video gaming, even if it's a handheld video game. It's definitely a larger global network. And that is what shocked me the most probably about this, that this is because it's a virtual sport. It's so global. It almost makes the world seem a little smaller in a sense.
Okay.
Yeah, great point.
Very cool.
So when I was at Infinite Esports and Entertainment, essentially it was a holdings company. We had 5 professional organizations and developmental academy. And so all in all, we had about 14 teams that were playing at a really high level. And I would talk to the parents because they'd get really curious to be like, so what is this actually all about? Like, is my kid going to be okay? And very similar to what Joanne said, it's a very social aspect. People think that video games is inherently very isolated, when in fact, it's very social. People are making some friends for life. Some of their best friends they're connecting with and playing, through this platform. Like I actually have colleagues of mine that I've actually never met in person, but it's through social media or through LinkedIn, whatever it may be, that we're connected and have developed a relationship. And it's that social connectivity. I think the other thing when I would speak to parents and the concerns would be like, well, what are the transferable skills? Like, oh, awesome. So tell me about your job and what you do. And they're like, well, I'm an executive and, I, have teamwork and leadership. I'm like, okay, yeah, so do they. Right. So the teamwork is there. The understanding, the domain knowledge of how the game and the rules are played, that can transfer. Just that skill itself of understanding how the rules, the constraints of the game, rules of engagement, tactics, offense, defense, things like this, that's all transferable. It'd be the same thing saying like a professional football player wouldn't be able to transfer those skills into business. And that's been proven time and time again of professional athletes becoming very successful entrepreneurs. Right. So the transfer is there. It's just a different context. And so I think like taking a step back and removing like the gaming from it, just say, okay, this is a game. They're playing at a high level, which requires a certain level of preparation, execution, and recovery, and just really honoring it as something like that.
Very good. And speaking to how some of that transfers over to other areas, I want to get into a little more of specifically what you're talking about in the book, and also some of the aspects that maybe some individuals might not consider when we're talking about esports. And one of those is the cognitive aspect of esports. Now, what are the cognitive effects of playing esports, and kind of the cognitive demands that are required there, whether we're talking about, memory, focus, reaction, you kind of mentioned some of those. I have to believe that, especially with elite esport athletes, that this has to be a pretty important area for them.
Yeah. And Taylor has worked hands-on with this, but that's primarily what our research has focused around, as well as incorporating exercise to improve that. So what you're doing is under a broad umbrella of executive function, essentially, and that is decision making, how fast you make those decisions, how quickly you fatigue with those decisions, and then keep in mind with all of that in esports, you also now have the physical component where that has to carry over to action moves. So there's multiple aspects of that, and my area has been mostly on, okay, like any other sport or job, if you do it too much, you have overuse injuries and you fatigue and you don't perform as well if you don't take a break. The same as, you're not going to play an hour of football. You're going to take quarterly breaks. That improves your performance. The same with this. All those skills you talk about, our focus has been to how do we get them to perform better, take the breaks, reduce overuse injuries while improving all those executive function skills that you just mentioned. And I know Taylor has done a lot with players with this as well.
Yeah, Joanne definitely hit it on the head there. It's really like chunking up. It's about perception, cognition, and motor skills. And what are the attributes of each one of those? And how do you put the individual in a position to be successful? And so keeping it pretty high level, it's looking at preparation. It's looking at the execution. So what happens before, during, and after the competition itself. And this is something we spent a lot of time thinking about when I was at AIM Labs. And just to correct, I didn't create the world's largest platform. AIM Labs became the world's largest platform.
Okay.
Right? I was just working there. I just want to make sure that's clear. Yeah, I mean, what we were doing there, I think, then they're still doing a great job at it, is really looking at what are the derivatives of the competitive exercise itself. So for those that are deep in HK and have read, all the periodization training and things like this, like Anatoly Bondarchuk, what he looked at is the, transfer of training. And so you could just map that across to cognitive skills. Okay, cognitively, what is asked of this individual for a competition exercise? And then what's the preparatory, what's developmental, and what's the GPP, or general physical preparedness? And so it's just coming up with that continuum and figuring out what's the analogy, and then how do we then build the training scenarios to expose an individual to those stimuluses, and then be able to continue to push, increase their maximum output so their operational output increases with it. And the amazing research that Joanne is doing is, well, then how do you look at the work rest ratios and recovery? How can exercise really amplify that? Which, for all of us coming from exercise physiology, we're always going to be exercise is so important, right? We just know that. And for a lot of these players, it's probably not their first go-to and how they would think to improve their performance. And so taking another step back and saying, okay, what does it mean to be a high performer? What are the variables that need to be true in order to play at a high level for as long as possible? And that's really what the book kind of covers.
Yeah.
So what are some of those specific things that you've worked with esports athletes on as far as kind of improving their cognition? I mean, obviously there's research out there, and anecdotally we know that, physical exercise can improve your cognitive abilities. But what are some of those other things that you have done to kind of help those athletes along?
Yeah, I'm smiling because it's very simple. It's sleep.
Yeah.
Eat a little bit better, move a little bit more, hydrate. It's very straightforward.
Okay.
There was a couple of cases where we got very specific in terms of our training approaches and the type of tasks and the scenarios, and almost like stress inoculation of how we were building different scenarios. But at the foundational level, it's okay, how did you sleep? Because sleep is free and it's one of the best PEDs you'll ever have.
Right.
So if we can actually refactor somebody's association and think about sleep as a skill, let's develop that skill. So that was a big thing. I mean, I remember working with players, and sleep was a huge one. We would always start with sleep. And then we'd look at nutrition. I'd have players who would be like, Coach, I can't sleep. I'm like, awesome. Let's address that. Is it falling asleep, staying asleep? We'd start to map out what does their day look like? And then nutrition was a huge factor. Well, come to find out, this individual that I'm thinking of, who has played at the highest level, won world championships. I mean, he was drinking 13 Mountain Dews a day. That's just what he did. Now, that's
Right.
not standard. Let's not overgeneralize that to the population and say all gamers do that. Just this individual did that. And it was, reframing his relationship with like, well, can we just cut that back? And I think in all of these scenarios, I think we do a good job of this in the book. It's not about overhauling and refactoring your entire process and routine. It's getting very specific and intentional and saying, okay, well, let's just test one thing. And if we could test this one thing and change this variable, then we'll know if it actually makes an impact. And so either start with sleep, start with nutrition, start with movement, pick whatever you think is going to give you the biggest lift, and just actually test it and run an experiment to see how much that actually gives you a lift or not.
So I'm going to piggyback off what he just said, Tyler, because I agree completely. And I'm going to go back to take the exercise component out and call it movement. And that's probably where my research has taken a massive turn. Our research focused on just taking breaks, 6-minute walk breaks. And I'm going to focus on 6 minutes because we have 3 projects now that showed that a 6-minute break not only improved vascular health in them, but we actually showed executive function improvement in them, meaning that they made better decisions and they did it faster, taking just a 6-minute walk break after an hour of playing video games. That's so short. 6 minutes is so short. And it was low intensity. It was like getting up and going to the bathroom. And I think the most important take from that study was that the players actually enjoyed it more than sitting and playing for prolonged periods. And, it helps right off the bat with overuse because their hands are fatigued, their eyes are fatigued, especially the eyes get fatigued. So just taking exercise out of it for a second, just movement, like Taylor put it, like just movement. 6 minutes of movement every hour is really something that we have been stressing a lot with our team at MYIT at least also.
Yeah, I'd love to piggyback on that too and build on it because that's such an important piece. And a lot of the teams are doing a great job of this now. And this is something that I would do with my teams is we would start the day off with movement. I love how Joanne frames that because it's not necessarily exercise. It's just find what moves you.
Right.
And so for us, it would just be walks. It's like, hey, you get the team together. They got to report at a certain time and we would go for a walk and it would be in the morning. And so it's like a lot of bang for buck. They're getting sunlight in their eyes. They're getting movement. And as we're walking, we're talking about the day.
Okay.
We're setting intentions. We're thinking about how are they mentally going to have the mindset and how they're going to approach the day, approach the practice. They're doing a little bit of their debriefing from the day before. And this is all part of like any high performer does these things. It's about your mindset. It's about your goals. It's about your process. It's about performing under pressure. And it's about harmony and recovery. So it's working that into these moments and finding those moments or scheduling those moments in throughout the day.
So everything that you both just mentioned there kind of makes me wonder, and I know there is a section in the book on this, but more of the psychological aspect of that. Do you guys have to work a lot more with that than maybe some people realize, and just like you said, just, keeping that correct mindset and making sure that they're on task and really just kind of thinking the right way when they go into competition?
Totally. I mean, it's for me, I look at it as like so much of what everyone does and how they show up is above the neck between the ears. And so it's just the conversations in between. It's like those little minor nudges, those micro nudges and the checking in and building rapport. That's just coaching 101, right? And first and foremost, it doesn't matter if you're a track and field coach, coaching movements, or a weight coach, or a nutrition coach, or a sports performance coach, like a mental performance coach. It all starts with the conversation. Now, there are individuals like Doug who wrote the chapter on psychological preparation of the book where like that's his domain, that's his expertise. And I think it really points to the need for more of the integration between departments and not the isolation where you get in these silos. And for people in traditional sports, we know this really well. Like if you work at any collegiate team, like, look, we say we like to work together, but really there's silos and it's like athletic trainers where strength staff and nutritionists have a say. And like everyone, it's like, hey, no, let's just come together. Like what's the best for the athlete? And so Doug's chapter is really great on that. He talks about some really good frameworks and how he lays that out and how he's built that with, not just one, but a number of very successful competitive teams.
I think Summer Scott also has a chapter in there, and
correct.
she coaches and she's a performance coach for health in one of the teams out west, and she really dives into the problems that they have hands-on every day. One of the things I will say about our book, we have the top occupational therapists and physical therapists that work with esport players. So there's a lot. We have 4 doctoral PTs in this book that some work hands-on directly with esport players and some don't. And I really think it's important because anybody who's trained in physical therapy, occupational therapy, they know tendinopathies, they know how to treat them, but they don't necessarily realize what they're going to see in esport players because they've never treated them before. And that is something that they can take from this book that I watched in real time doing the book with these authors, how some authors were learning certain tendinopathies. Everybody thinks, hey, carpal tunnel syndrome might be a common injury with this, and it's actually not. There's other tendinopathies that go in there. Caitlin McGee is one of the authors on the chapter. She's excellent. Matthew Yu. They're 2 of the top leading physical therapists with esport players, and that kind of knowledge you're not going to get someplace else.
And I think you started to talk right there about one of my next questions that I had thought about previous to even seeing this book is kind of those overuse injuries. And I'll admit that's one of the first things that I kind of went to in my mind is maybe that tendinopathy. But what are some of the more common issues that you guys end up dealing with as far as overuse?
Well, again, overuse injury, I'm not a physical therapist, we refer to that, but what they do see is a lot of wrist and hand overuse tendinopathies in the wrist and the hand. There's something in the book called thoracic outlet syndrome. Again, I'm not an expert in that, but the book really dives into what we see with the overuse injuries with the wrist and the hand. And the one thing that's stressed is preventative medicine. Preventing these injuries is key because once you do have a tendinopathy, it's really playing catch up and saying, okay, now we've got to treat an injury. You really want to get to it before that. It's the same as I tell you, if someone plays the violin in the same position, awkward position over and over again for hours and hours and hours, you're going to have an overuse injury. It's what they do for a living. With these esport players, it's what they do. So the book goes really into how to prevent a lot of these tendinopathies. Yes, they'll show you how to treat it after, but a lot of it is preventative of how to, really take the break and do the right stretches and strengthening exercises to prevent them.
Yeah. Joanne hit it. I mean, the typical way I saw it is it's upper and lower cross syndrome. And our PTs are very much about the preventative side. And, Joanne's point around the violinist, or if anything, is like form follows function, right? And we know this very well from sport. So if you're constantly in the same sort of patterns and loading patterns, your form tends to go into that pattern because it fits and has a specific output or a function. And so just being mindful of that. And I think our book does a great job of outlining some assessments and ways to look at that. And then again, to Joanne's point, how to prevent it. Like this is very top of mind for me. I recently reconnected with one of the players that I had at the pro level, and he had to retire because his injury was not managed correctly. And it got to the point where now he needs surgery and he's done playing, which is very unfortunate. And that should never happen.
Yeah, it is actually the number one musculoskeletal injuries is the number one reason that most professional esport players have to leave the sport.
So I guess to the other point, then I guess that speaks to even more the importance of, like the book says, conditioning for esports and just kind of maintaining all of that together, whether that is the physical, the mental, the nutrition, recovery, everything that you kind of mentioned. Prior to getting into esports, did that kind of surprise you how much would actually go into keeping these athletes healthy?
Oh, yeah. And, I think a lot of people think, well, what could go wrong? They're just sitting in front of a computer. Most like office workers sit in front of a computer. If you saw how intense the competition is and how fast their movements, the rapid hand movements over, 500 moves per minute on one finger. And I tell everybody, why don't you sit and tap your finger, as fast as you can for 1 minute and see how your finger feels after that. And the positioning that I see them in, and this is a very young field. So I'm watching 18-year-olds to 25-year-olds in these completely awkward positions. And I was a little alarmed. I was a little shocked at how intense it was and how prevalent injuries are.
Yeah, I think for me, I had, some idea, but you only know until you know.
Yeah.
right? And I think a big part of that, and I call this out in my chapter, is really like checking the ego aside and saying, like, there's a lot that I can learn here, and let's learn and grow together. And I think for anybody that's interested in getting in this space, it's really important to really adopt that mindset, because their knowledge is so far beyond what we'll ever understand about the complexities and the tactics and the strategy of the game. And for us, we don't need to know technical and tactical execution, but what we do need to know is appreciate the amount of load or the stress or the strain and the conditions in which they perform, right? It's very similar, like a strength conditioning coach could be an amazing strength conditioning coach and maybe didn't play in the NFL,
Right.
or maybe didn't run hurdles, right? But you can understand and reverse engineer. It's the classic Charlie Francis, watch the player, not the game. Right. So I would encourage people who are getting into this space and read our book and start to apply those concepts, is take the book information and pair that with a lot of curiosity and ask the questions and really co-create that program and really have it evolve. And that's our hope with the book, is that the book is a jump off point for evolution and more research and more people to get into the space to really contribute and, have an impact on these young individuals and, change that industry.
Recognize. I would say the book of anything for people who are starting out, even working with this population, probably the most thing is recognizing the symptoms of overuse and digital eye fatigue, because a lot of times these players don't even understand when they think their hands cramping every once in a while and they need to take a break, that's the start of a tendinopathy. And that's really when you have to see someone, to nip it in the bud before it becomes a chronic issue. But nobody really understands that at that stage of playing. If they're so young, they just think, oh, I'll take a break, my hand hurts or my eyes hurt. That's digital fatigue syndrome. That can turn to something where you might not be able to sit in front of that computer for long periods of time anymore. So recognizing the symptoms early on, I think, is key.
Okay. Like you said, so much more nuanced than maybe you thought before you got into the industry. Definitely from people from the outside, like you said, some people might think it's just someone sitting at a desk or sitting at a table, playing a game, but so much more that goes into it than simply that. You kind of spoke to it a little bit. Where do you see esports going from here? How do you see it continuing to evolve? I know it's still a very young sport, very young industry right now in this respect, but where do you guys kind of see it going from here?
So I'll just speak on a collegiate level. Obviously, the numbers show, I told you 2018, there was only about 60 college teams, and now we're looking at 240, and that's just registered ones. It's also clubs. High school, the numbers have gone, there's over 8,000 high school teams right now, and I think in 2018, there was only about 40. So it's exploded. Where do I think it's going? I think it's going to be something that's taken a little bit more seriously for competition, especially for schools, like any other sport. I think they'll start seeing more support on a collegiate level, like any other sport, where they'll have trainers and fitness professionals to help them perform. And we are offering scholarships now. Schools have been offering scholarships for a few years now, but a lot more colleges are offering scholarships because it does bring in a certain caliber of student that might go into certain fields. And also, to go on to the next level, this is something that military comes and looks at college campuses for recruitment for. Essentially, they have a skill that's also needed in Air Force, Space Force, that they come and look and say, hey, we need people who have these executive function skills. So I just think it's going to be taken a lot more seriously as it's growing.
Yeah, Joanne makes a great point. The developmental track is going to continue to grow and expand. I think the opportunity for research and development in the space is very exciting. A lot of my time and conversations lately have not so much been on the competitive side for professional esports, but really, like Joanne mentioned, is Air Force, Space Force, Cyber Command. And what are the analogies, and how can we start to rethink performance for these, cyber warriors, or these individuals that are competing, protecting our nation and our country through this, digital medium in the cyberspace. So that's actually very interesting to me, and still keeping an eye on the competitive esports side, but thinking about, the bigger picture and everything.
And like you said at the very beginning, there are a lot of skills that people don't recognize initially that will transfer over to other areas of life. Definitely the military is a huge one that I know people take very seriously, obviously, for obvious reasons there. So like I said beforehand, I do want to be respectful of your time. You guys gave a ton of information in that little bit of time there. I know everyone got a lot of information from it. If you're listening to this, haven't got your copy yet, definitely pick up your copy, Conditioning for Esports. You can get it on our website, us.humankinetics.com. I know it's on Amazon too, probably a number of other places that you can find it. Whether you are, this is my takeaway from it, whether you are a competitive esports athlete or just gaming recreationally, there's so much information that you can take from it in terms of, like you guys mentioned throughout the conversation, staying healthy, staying on top of your game, and really learning ways to improve all those areas. So I will give you guys the last word here to kind of wrap it up. Maybe let people know where they can keep up with all the great work that you guys are doing. I know that you guys do a ton of research too, which I'm personally interested in moving forward. So
go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, for me, yeah, my encouragement is really to push and expand and see what's possible. You know, it's I never thought I would have been in the esports space. Right. So I think going from traditional sport and then jumping into esports, and, you know, a lot of people told me it was career suicide, and I'm just laughing now because it's been one of the best choices I've ever made in my life. Just encouraging people to really, for themselves, to stretch and expand and grow. And if you have an idea, pursue it with the utmost integrity and go after it and see what's possible. You know, so this is beyond the book. It's like the book is just a glimpse into what's possible and to continue to push and grow. And a lot of my content, the stuff that I write about, is actually on LinkedIn. I never go on Instagram. Sorry about that. But you can find me on LinkedIn. You can check me out, Taylor Johnson Performance, and then just look me up on LinkedIn. But love to connect. I'd love to answer any questions that you have and help you on that journey.
Yeah, so second that I'm with Taylor. I'm not a big Instagram person, sorry. But on Twitter, you could find me, Joanne DiFrancisco-Donoghue 4. I usually try to keep up to date. I'm on the Esports Research Network, and we're always reposting any kind of new studies that are coming out that are relevant. I have a lot of young PhD students or even undergrad students who will reach out and have ideas for research, or trainers that just love to cite our work so they could prove to their players that what they're doing is scientifically based. So yeah, you could follow me on Twitter, and you could find me on LinkedIn as well. Me and Taylor are always going back and forth on those platforms. So yeah,
right.
well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Again, fascinating conversation. Again, definitely if you're listening to this, watching, pick up your copy, Conditioning for Esports. Again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the conversation, and hope to talk to you guys sometime soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Aaron.